Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and excited to have with me Alex from DPS Skis. Do you mind just introducing yourself and your role, and then we can kind of get into your world right now?
Yes, of course. My name's Alex Adama. I'm the CEO for DPS Skis here in Salt Lake City. We manufacture skis, and we call it the world's most advanced skis. And right now we're doing a bit of a pivot to some personal protective equipment. So anyways, appreciate you having me here and happy to share a little bit of our story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think right now, especially for students in our program, just students across the board who are looking at getting into this industry, or anyone who's looking to dive into the outdoor industry, I think these types of conversations are really valuable just to hear, what are companies going through? What are people going through? Kind of in the middle of this. So probably still a lot of unanswered questions, but I think it's really valuable at least to have conversations and just kind of share what you're facing right now and your thoughts and feelings. And, but anyways, personally, how are you doing? How's your family? How are you feeling going through this unprecedented situation?
Yeah. As we spoke about a little bit previously, it's got silver lining, and we also have avoided the flu, the pandemic virus here, but we've definitely come down with a bit of cabin fever. 4 kids in the house and 2 work from home parents. So we're trying to figure that whole thing out. But it's been interesting. I almost feel keep trying to encourage people. I think at some point we're going to get back to work, and the busyness is going to sweep us away. So let's try and find the silver lining here and enjoy the moment, because there's very few times, I think, in our entire lives where we'll just sort of be forced to sit still and be present. So we're doing our best to make the most of that. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience trying to navigate that whole thing.
Right. And then where are you at from a business perspective? I mean, this is nothing prepares you for this, as a CEO, president of a company, nothing prepares you for this. Where are you sitting as a business right now?
Yeah, it's ironic too, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but we did have a bit of a financial trial last year as we kind of navigated some rough waters. And believe it or not, we actually did have a little bit of sort of preparation. And really the key thing that came out of that was just a real sense of purpose and team unity across the company, from manufacturing through our warehouse and the front office and sales and marketing. So it was a little bit fortuitous for us to have some challenges to work through in 2019, because it's really given us a bit more confidence, I think, than many others who are looking at this with a fairly daunted perspective. That being said, we're not immune from the challenges that others are facing as well. And so, we stay very close contact with a lot of different industry partners, whether it's in the outdoor industry, manufacturing, just in general, just trying to seek clues like everybody else is from so many webinars and things that are being written and whatnot. So we're navigating fairly well, definitely a lot better than I would have anticipated 4 or 5 weeks ago. And part of that has been a pivot that we've done to producing some medical need equipment for the Department of Health, which has helped us to retain some jobs and avoid some furloughs that others have not been as fortunate enough to avoid. And then we're still producing skis. We've just scaled back a little bit. The way our industry works is, as probably many of your listeners know, is we take preseason orders in the first and early part of the second quarter of the year, and then we're delivering kind of around Labor Day is when it really kicks in for us, as ski shops and specialty retail shops are gearing up for the winter season. So our preseason orders are actually quite strong. Even in the last couple of weeks, it's not as if we have stale orders that came in before the pandemic hit, but we actually have pretty current orders. So shops are hoping for the best, and we're hoping with them and continuing with production, but in the near term, at least, just dialing that back a little bit with plans to crank up maybe closer to 120, 150% of normal to make up during that time and not take as much risk right now. So the offset of producing personal protective equipment is really helping to balance that out for us. So we're in a more, I think, fortuitous position, like I said, than some others, but I'm still dealing with the angst, of course, of all of it.
Yeah, sure. So from a company perspective, it sounds like you've been able to retain a lot of employees, and part of that because of the PPE pivot. How did that come about? And how quickly did that change take place?
Yeah, it's we watched this coming our way, especially in Italy, as that widely reported the country started to shut down, but that affected the ski season pretty early relative to North America. That was starting to happen in late February, and then kind of spread throughout the Central European states like Germany, Austria, France. So we sort of were anticipating some of this coming, but not sure how it would affect here. When finally the North American resorts closed down, and I guess about a month ago, a little over a month ago, that's when we really were trying to understand what does this all mean and how is this going to affect just the general macroeconomics of the country and so on. And of course, at that time, there was a lot of stories about factories switching over. There was a lot of analogies or comparisons made to World War II type of scenarios. And I just began to look at us as a manufacturing facility, which is fairly rare to actually be making our skis in the USA. So we had that fortunate sort of advantage in that situation. And just start to ask the question if we could potentially convert and help with the effort in some way. We have one machine in particular. It's a CNC static table cutter, an Eastman machine that was originally designed for the textile industry, and many ski companies like us use it to cut the ski-based material. So we just started asking each other the questions of, could we potentially, none of us even heard of an N95 mask, or at least I know I had before all this, but we started asking, could we cut fabric for gowns or N95s and pass them along the supply chain somewhere? But where is the supply chain? How do we plug into it? Where do we get the materials, et cetera? And then at some point, one of our engineers looked at the machine and thought, geez, we could do those plastic shields, which I had really never taken notice of either. I'm sure I've seen them in TV shows or movies, but never really noticed those face shields that all the doctors and nurses are wearing in the emergency front lines right now. And then it wasn't very long before we found some open source designs from some cooperative partners and started prototyping that. In the meantime, I just started launching emails and phone calls to everybody I could think of through our networks in the state, whether that was through the governor's office directly, in some cases, the governor's office of economic development, Utah Manufacturer Association, Outdoor Industry Association, Snow Sports Industries, just right down the line, the Utah Outdoor Association, and just trying to figure out, where do we plug into this? What is the need? Can we help fill it? Or is this something that we should just, kind of let go? And eventually, there was a couple of critical linchpins that came through for us, connected us to the right organization, particularly Utah Department of Health, that did have a need, was trying to fill it, and trying to understand what that was. And we were able to loosely tap into the supply chain to start to procure the plastic and things like that we needed. Still not sure how it would all come together, but it was a pretty mad scramble for a couple of weeks there. So yeah, it took a couple of weeks. It was kind of late March when we really said, let's try and figure something out. And between networking a bunch of parallels at the same time, it all sort of culminated at once, where we found a need with the Department of Health. We found the supply chain. At least it was pretty herky-jerky at first, but now we've stabilized that. And then, if you'd like, I could get into a little bit, but we found some partners that could help offset the cost for us, because that was a pretty significant concern out of the gate as well.
Yeah, of course. Let's get into that, and kind of along the same lines, maybe speak to just the level of cooperation. You alluded to this, but the amount of cooperation that's needed to make this change happen. And what have you seen from your perspective? Everyone just kind of coming together. Has that worked well? Have there been issues? What's your experience been just collaborating with the larger industry, manufacturers, the outdoor industry, the state, to get through some of this?
Yeah. As far as issues, the only issues are, what you would expect for logistics challenges, and just trying to figure out what the need is, where we can supply it from, and that kind of stuff. As you know, from working and corresponding a lot with outdoor industry companies, we have a unique little ecosystem here. It's a very supportive and strong camaraderie among that group. So once I had a pretty clear idea that we would actually be able to do this and go ahead with it, my immediate first outreach at that point was to the Utah Outdoor Association board, which includes companies like Petzl and Goal Zero and Specialized and Cotopaxi and Black Diamond, a number of other. I'm going to definitely leave some off, but reached out to this group, and we had already been corresponding, whether by email or some phone calls, and our board meetings, just talking about how people are reacting to this, how they're handling furloughs and whatnot. And I just said, look, we're going to do this. We don't know how it'll all play out. We don't know. We know you're all suffering too. If anybody has any ideas, though, to potentially help us, whatever that would look like, introductions or support of some kind, please let me know. Of course, many of them immediately said, yeah, well, let us think about this. I'm not sure how we can plug in. We're dealing with layoffs or whatever, but let's see if there's something that we can do. Goal Zero in particular, they actually have been doing okay through this because they typically have a lot of customers in doomsday type of events that really need or at least want the protection of their products. So they were actually in a pretty good position and said, look, we can't manufacture here, but we're happy to support you. And they made some pretty generous offers to help in getting the raw materials that we need on the plastic side in particular. And then Tom Adams from Goal Zero, who was formerly with the Office of Outdoor Recreation, said, "Oh yeah, I'll love to make some introductions. Let me see if I can, connect you with anybody and see how I can help." And then I don't remember if it was a few hours later or the next day, but he called back and he said, "I just thought of this, but we could potentially supply our headbands from our headlamps, you guys, for the face shields, which hadn't occurred to either of us before that." And he made a whole bunch of phone calls overnight to his headquarters in France and their operations in Malaysia and other places, and realized that at least at the outset they could supply some of the headbands, and then let's see what all transpires and how they could fit into that. So it was, that all happened in a matter of a day and a half or 2 days, where those two in particular were able to jump in. And originally we thought we would be doing this project at a financial loss. The benefit for us was, we'd be helping the community in a time where we just felt like we needed to do something with some purpose. And we also were able to retain some skilled jobs and keep our employees from some of the unemployment scenarios that they were fearing and we were all fearing. So those were the original sort of goals of it. But now that it's really ballooned, the partnership with Goal Zero and Petzl is what allowed us to really dig in, and we've since had our orders. I don't know what the term is, not quadruple, but we've eightfold over the first 10,000 units. We're now selling about 80,000 units to the Department of Health. And work closely with them to understand what their price points were. Work closely with EDC Utah, GoEd, and others to just kind of understand where the best place to plug into. So the partnership has been just a super fun thing to be a part of, and that's where I say it's been exhausting. Those were some long 12, 16-hour days for everybody involved. Myself and others on the networking perspective, and then the engineers, doing prototyping, and then with the production team when it became their job to actually go into commercialization with it. So long, exhausting days, but super exhilarating because a sense of purpose really came out of that. Many people in the company have frontline workers in their family or their spouses or whatever. And so just the idea that we could do something to really support the effort and help the company just sustain ourselves was a pretty amazing event to kind of unfold for us. So those partners really definitely made that happen. It was a pretty remarkable thing to be a part of.
Yeah. So how does that work within your manufacturing facility? I've been there, but you do everything in the U.S. And in Utah. What does your manufacturing facility look like? Are you manufacturing skis and PPE equipment kind of at the same time, separate spaces, or is it do you have different shifts working on different things? What does that look like? How are you able to do both?
Yeah, a little bit of both those aspects is what we're doing. So before we started doing the PPE, there was a lot of angst about, is it responsible even to be building skis right now? And how should we handle that? Our concern was, if we stopped building skis, where would we be stopping for 2 weeks or 2 months or 12 months? We didn't know. And we really had no idea if our company could sustain that type of a shutdown and restart at some point and be financially viable. So we were really anxious about that. But like I said, once the PPE started, the sense of purpose and drive definitely changed, and enthusiasm. And so what we've done is the standard best practices that we've watched from others, whether it's in the Outdoor Association or Manufacturers Association. We're doing temperature checks at the door. We're using separate entrances as much as possible. We've removed the common areas, lunchrooms, things like that temporarily. And we're spacing out our assembly stations and that kind of stuff. So, we've slowed our production, staggered shifts, those kinds of typical recommendations for best practices. And then the Eastman machine is the main one that cuts our ski-based material and also does the mask. So yeah, we've just had to do some calendaring and some timing on that to make sure that we can do both. But so far, it's running more hours than it maybe would otherwise, but it actually balances out pretty well. So we're cutting that stuff, and then we've got a smaller part of the factory where it doesn't take much for the assembly process once we have all the parts cut out and we have the headbands assembled. But that's just done in a little separate area as well. And we're actually packaging them as a little bit of assembly on site. So rather than try and have the shields totally complete and just smashed in huge boxes, we're kind of doing it in two parts, where you have the band and the fasteners as one part, and then the flat shields that they can assemble on site with some instructions. So, but yeah, we've been able to balance out both those ski and shield production scenarios together.
What have you learned about yourself as well as your team throughout this situation?
Well, as I alluded to in the beginning, some challenges that we've had in the past really showed us the resilience and the unity that we do have, but it's only been fortified and even more enjoyable. I think enjoyable. I guess it's relative. That's the way I'm wired to describe it that way. Not everybody would, except that I think everybody's proud and motivated by the idea, again, that we're able to help the community effort. We're able to save jobs of our own team members, and sort of procure or strengthen the future success and opportunity for DPS skis. So we've all just learned to rally together and understand the importance of that camaraderie. Everybody has to sacrifice in different ways, and it looks totally different right now when you have half your company or a third of your company working from home, and they're making sacrifices, doing things at late hours that are harder to see, and then of course those in the manufacturing and warehouse settings are, it's a little easier to see the sacrifices they're making, the long hours, the kind of risk they're taking, frankly, as far as at least what we understand the pandemic risks to be right now. So, but everybody understanding that each of us doing their own part and having this sense of purpose is really, I think, the biggest takeaway for us. And just knowing that hopefully we're protecting our futures, and not only ours, but this really does have implications, in both directions on the supply chain. We have suppliers that are, smaller, some are bigger, but some are smaller operations that really need our business to support what they're trying to do. And then on the other side, we have, hundreds of specialty retail shops around the world that whenever the pandemic concerns are over with and they open their doors back up, we're hoping to have skis at the door waiting for them so that they can get their businesses going, pay their employees. So it's a real interdependent system that we're a part of, and we recognize that as a team and are kind of enjoying that aspect that we're surviving and hopefully helping others to be able to recover in the future as we get through this.
I feel like that's one of the big things that, hopefully, when we get out of this relatively soon, hopefully that's one of the takeaways, right? Is like how interconnected we are and how small of a world this actually is. I that's my sense right now, is people are realizing that it's like, oh wow, we're all connected in some way. There's those specialty retailers, to your suppliers, to people across the world. I think that's really come to the forefront, and hopefully we can maintain that moving forward. But
Sure.
what's the sense of, I guess, I don't think anyone really knows into the ski season what that looks like, but you kind of mentioned some optimism to start. Again, no one really knows, what that will look like, but at least with your specialty retailers you're working with, there's still buying happening.
Yeah, there is, and it's definitely cautious in a lot of cases, but at the same time, I think from a snow sports perspective, we have a little more, I don't know what the word is, little less risk, at least at the moment, it appears, than the summer sports. So, right now, obviously, is the time when people would be out buying ski gear, or climbing gear, biking gear, kayaking, whatever it is. And a lot of these shops that we work with do switch over to those sports as specialty in the summer. So, it's a little nerve wracking, I think, for those brands in particular that are selling summer type of activity equipment, and same with the shops that are, really reliant on that. In a lot of cases in ski shops, if they don't convert to bikes, they might just shut down altogether for these summer months. So they actually may not feel the effects as much. So we're just kind of in a wait and see mode in both scenarios as far as how long this is going to run for, and how deep a recession is, and whether the buyers will still be there when the opportunity comes to, get those businesses back up and running at full scale. So, and of course it's different in different regions. There's talks about Italy opening up a little bit right now, but of course the ski season is over at this moment. So we just don't know what that holds for the fall yet. So yeah, I think there's optimism, but of course there's angst, and nobody knows. There's all kinds of conjecture about what's going to happen, but I don't think anybody really knows.
Right.
But as far as our order book, at least we're happy to see that it seems like there's some confidence out there from specialty retail that they'll come through this. So we'll just have to see, obviously.
Yeah, as having manufacturing so close, what advantages does that give you? I guess in a situation like this, like how, I guess you can be responsive, right? You can adapt, you can pivot and work on new products, or, go the PPE route. I guess my question is, um, I guess when you place an order, do you already have product that you've made anticipating orders that are coming in, or do you make to order when you get a large order for the coming season on a typical year?
Yeah, so I mean, we know we have a pretty solid sense of what our best selling SKUs are, and so we're able to somewhat predict and forecast that, but we definitely do adjust that based on what comes in on these
Mhm.
preseason orders. And we do have that luxury, essentially, of making the adjustments as we go through the spring and summer. So, our it's most efficient when we can run hundreds of units of a SKU at a time. But if we're planning it out in advance, if we have just smaller units of shorter or longer lengths that typically are on the outside of the bell curve, we can plan that out and adjust to that as the preseason orders come in. So, if we're in some cases, we do a small amount of our skis overseas with a contract manufacturer in Asia, and that's a very small part of our portfolio. But yeah, the risk with those or companies that are really beholden to that is you have to submit a PO, and then they just start running with it, and they order materials and everything for that. So we're able to be much more nimble with our own production, which definitely helps a lot. And raw material is largely reusable for different models, different SKUs across our line. So if we have to adjust one or another, we can. So that does help us, at least for now. It does.
Right. And I think we touched on it a little bit, what types of equipment, PPE equipment you're making, but could you specifically share, you mentioned face shields, masks.
Yeah.
Is there anything else being made at your facilities right now?
Yeah, so what we ended up discovering was the N95 masks or gowns just weren't really a viable option for us. We didn't have a good place. The material was really hard to come by, as it is for the face shields too. But for everything, it's really hard to come by because people are scrambling everywhere for the material. But we also didn't have an outlet for that, and we weren't sure where to plug in. But the protective face shields was something we could do start to finish, and that's why it worked so much easier for us. And we plugged in with the Department of Health to do that. So we are doing those face shields. Our predominant customer is the Utah Department of Health. We're producing, at this point, I think about 80,000 shields for them, and then we're fulfilling smaller orders of 25, 50, 100 for different. There's actually a hospital in New York where there was some Navy Reserve doctors that went out there. We sent some with them. Some of the Ute reservations, or Navajo reservation, I believe it was, down in southern Utah, the Moab Hospital. So we're fulfilling smaller batches for those types of needs, but it's been predominantly for the Department of Health that we've had those face shields. So we've also made a little bit of hand sanitizer. We're kind of tongue-in-cheek referring it to as Phantom hand sanitizer. So the extent you're familiar with our Phantom product, it's a permanent base glide for skis and snowboards that replaces the need for traditional ski waxes. We have a pretty sharp chemist and product team around the Phantom product line in general, and so there's actually some materials that we're able to repurpose into making hand sanitizer. So we've made small batches of that in case there was a need for it, and just considering what that would look like longer term, because that's still an evolving thing as well. And then lastly, along the Phantom product line, we have what we call the Phantom Cure Stations. So the way that permanent base glide works, it actually is a product that bonds permanently to the base of a ski or a snowboard, and provides that convenience, that environmentally friendly permanent extra glide factor for the skis. That UV cure station actually has the capability, with a little bit of retrofitting, to potentially sterilize N95 masks. So we're not certain yet that this will be commercially viable, but we are working on that process. We're actually working with some pretty prominent medical institutions here in the U.S. to test some of that and validate. We've done the first round of validation, but now we need some more stringent actual medical community validation of that, which we're in the process of doing this week. So we don't know where that'll go. It's fairly speculative at this point, although 6 weeks ago I never imagined we'd be making face shields either. But the unique thing with that cure station is they're pretty easy to transport, so we could get them wherever we need them to. There's already hundreds in the wild, whether it's in North America or Europe or even Japan and New Zealand. So there could be a scenario where small ski communities could have their N95 masks sterilized at the local ski shop. So we have no idea how that'll all play out, but these are the kinds of things that we're at least working with right now, and just trying to be nimble in case the need is there, and just see what we can do. So that's where, again, this is pretty exhilarating for a little scrappy entrepreneurial ski company like DPS. We just love to innovate and do fun things like this. So this is highly energizing us to, kind of keep tinkering with these things and see how we might be able to support the effort.
Right. You mentioned, I mean, 6 weeks ago, maybe not ever thinking you'd be making face shields. What's been the biggest challenge in making those products? I mean, is it finding people to buy them? Is it making the product itself? Is it trying to meet those medical grade standards and getting up to speed on kind of the requirements there? What's been the greatest challenge for you?
Well, with the face shields, thankfully, it's not as, especially in the current environment, it's not quite as stringent as some of the other products, especially like the N95s, as far as meeting some of the FDA requirements and those kinds of things. I would say the hardest part has been sorting out the supply chain, and understanding where we can procure the material, because there were days where we would try and buy rolls of plastic, for example. We'd call and get a quote in the morning, and by lunchtime, truly it was gone. It was a kind of crazy scenario where everybody was scrambling for those materials. So the engineering side of it is easy for us. I mean, that's what we do. That's our calling card, is really innovative shaping and ski material design and that kind of stuff. So that's the easy part for us. And then on the production side, again, balancing that labor need and calendaring is something that was a little bit of an effort to just sort it out, but not too difficult for us. So I would say the supply chain has been the biggest challenge. Of where to get materials. Now we have a steady flow, so that's more or less worked out. And then B, where are you going to plug that into, that need and that support? And having a partner like the Department of Health has helped us iron that out. But it did take a little while. We started with a couple of smaller orders to validate, improve ourselves, and then we're really clinching and wondering, should we be committing to lots more plastic and other materials, headbands, coming from Petzl and whatnot, or should we hold back? And once we finally got, kind of some validation, some proof of concept with them and some follow-on orders, then we were, in a much more comfortable place with it. So,
right.
And now we shift to wondering, what the long-term holds. Is this just something we've done for the short term? And I know there's many companies locally and across the country and world even that have made these types of conversions and just don't have the answers of whether they'll continue to do this over the long term, because there are now a lot more people in the market. Certainly not all of these suppliers are going to be needed long term. So it's a question of, whether we would continue to do that or not. And we're definitely keeping that door open, but not really putting many eggs in that basket at the moment. So we'll
Right.
see.
Well, kind of along those lines, I was going to ask you to break out your crystal ball a little bit. And I guess, again, probably too early to tell, but what are your thoughts on the future of work? How do you see things changing? Maybe in your world, manufacturing, that doesn't really go remote. But do you see any other impacts, for the future of work?
Yeah. There's probably lots of streams of that conversation for sure. Right now we are working from home from a sales, operations, finance, marketing standpoint. I think it's doable and we're adjusting to it, but it's not ideal by any means. Our long-term hope, of course, is to be back, adjacent to our factory or nearby with our factory and just improve the communication and collaborations they're just a little harder to come by right now. And maybe that's just because we haven't vetted. So I'm sure there are other companies though that will take a totally different approach. And so, not sure how that will go generally speaking, but for us, we're hoping to kind of get back to life as normal as that goes. What we're watching as far as the long term is two things in particular. What's going to be the effect on retail, specialty retail in our case in particular. We've all known that retail, generically speaking on the macro level is suffering, whether it's malls or strip malls or that kind of thing. It hasn't impacted us too directly on the specialty side of ski. Some of the bigger chains like AJ Motion or others that have gone out of business, we personally aren't in those stores or haven't been in those stores, so we haven't been as affected, but certainly there are other outdoor brands that will feel that pain. And I do expect that this will accelerate a lot of that, but I don't think that's a necessarily unique thought to me. I think that's just kind of the reality of where people are seeing things going and more shifting to online purchases and comfort around that in outdoor products too. So I think that's a big thing. And then on the PPE side, again, we don't know if we'll stay involved in this category or not. But we're also hearing a lot. I'm one of the committees for the governor's economic task force from an industry perspective, and just on the call on Friday, there's a lot of discussion about what it takes to get customers and employees back to work safely and feeling comfortable in that environment. And there's probably going to be a significant need for PPE in totally new channels that we never would have imagined before, whether that's even, hair salons or fast, fresh restaurants or whatever that would look like. So for us, we're kind of looking at both those streams. How does it affect specialty outdoor retail? And then from a PPE perspective, is this a category we should consider long-term for these reasons, just because whole new market opportunities are going to come up that we may be able to fulfill that aren't necessarily opportunistic, but just new opportunities that never existed before.
Right. Yeah. That I've heard similar things, especially in the restaurant business, some anticipation that there's going to be, a much greater need for face shields, masks, in food preparation. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But what would you say to people who are furloughed, looking for work, students who are graduating right now, which is kind of our situation. What would you say to people who are kind of, heading into kind of an uncertain economic time right now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Of course, I don't envy that position, and that's part of the reason that we've been so, I use the word exhilarated by what we're doing, because it has been such a core purpose for me right now is to figure out how to retain those jobs for our team specifically, because it's just about all that we can control, and even in that, we probably can't control it as much as we want to think we can. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of angst about how this will shake out. Me being an economics major and MBA and all that kind of stuff, I tend to think that the fundamentals of the economy, I'm a little bit out of water here. I'm not a trained economist anymore, but I do think that the downturn that we've seen is, artificial based on these external factors of the pandemic. And so I do think there's a pretty decent chance that we'll come back strong if it doesn't drag on for too long. So, but it may look a little bit like 2008, but I don't think it's going to be that deep. And I think, jobs will come back online. But of course, like you said, the future of work will potentially change a lot of that, whether it's more remote work, whether it's more contract type work. So I would be sort of thinking of in those terms as far as what that new economy will look like, because this will definitely accelerate trends that were out there, whether it's direct to consumer, work from home, contract type of work. And manufacturing, I could see actually maybe an uptick in U.S. manufacturing, because I think it's exposed a lot of vulnerabilities we have in the ongoing trade tensions and political tensions that we have with countries like China in particular. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know how much that will affect the outdoor industry, but in general terms, I think the manufacturing industry will hopefully see some efforts to strengthen this sector, in the U.S. So that's a whole lot of rambling without a real clear answer. But next time we talk, I'll have given it some more thought now that you've put it in my head.
Well, you know what, your crystal ball was working, because that was my next question, was kind of how you see this impacting U.S.-based manufacturing. If you see, more of that coming here. So you answered that question before I could ask it.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, just on I think it was in the Wall Street Journal just this morning. I don't know if it was the business section or the main page, but it was just talking about how China is easing some of the restrictions on some of this PPE. But I think the sort of what's the word? The flare was already sent in the air that this is something we got to be watching for and concerned about. And so I think those types of things will continue to cause legislation to come out of Washington that kind of pushes us more in this direction and maybe help subsidize or whatever it would be. But it seems like that's a reality. At the same time, the larger macro trend, just globalization and shifting of but just by labor costs and whatnot, I don't know ultimately if we'll reverse that trend or change that trend, but I do think there'll be efforts from a U.S. manufacturing perspective to try and become more secure in some of these key areas. Even there's another article in the Wall Street Journal this morning talking about rare earth materials, and just how kind of vulnerable we are in that scenario too. So again, this is probably getting way off topic from an outdoor perspective, but those are two key ones that people are watching right now, and I think will impact U.S. manufacturing and resource planning for the long term for sure.
Right. And then, in addition to everything else you're working on, the task forces you're on, running this company, you're also the chairman of the Utah Outdoor Association.
Right.
Um, I guess your thoughts on kind of the state of the outdoor industry here, or maybe just the temperature of at least the companies that are a part of the association right now.
I would say the ecosystem in general is strong, and again, the camaraderie and collaboration that we've personally experienced and been a part of, and the support of one another has been really great to be a part of, and it speaks to the kind of just culture and desire that people have to not only start these companies but to be a part of them. So again, it's not the most lucrative industry out there, necessarily, but it does continue to allow us to do things that help us to pursue a passion and kind of a camaraderie in the workforce that all enjoys that work more so than I always say it's more fun to make skis than toaster ovens. And not that we all need toaster ovens, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just something more fun about everybody wishing they could take a pair home or whatever it is on the weekend. And I think that is still strong within Utah, and I think there's lots of cool innovative things happening here that will continue to go that way, and the talent pool continues to increase, and programs like yours continue to provide more opportunity for employers to innovate and grow here. So I see that still continuing in that direction for Utah in general.
Right. And then maybe a last question kind of along those lines, but we mentioned some of the positive stories or the positive responses coming out of this, your collaboration with Goal Zero, Petzl, Eastman. I know Cotopaxi has come out strong and done quite a bit on that front as well. Are there any other positive stories that you've heard from outdoor brands in the state?
So there's this funny one actually. When I sent that email out to the Utah Outdoor Association, I also included one of our advisors, who's the CFO at Yeti Bicycles. So it's in Golden, Colorado. So it's not necessarily your state, but it comes back around because I asked him if there was any potential sponsorship or support or whatever that might look like, and he said, we've got a couple CNC machines that are down right now too, and people kind of idle. We're going to look into this ourselves. So they actually went ahead, and even without an outlet to sell to or to distribute to, they just went ahead and started building face shields. And I think they were building N95 masks as well. I'm not sure, but they just went ahead with that program, and they were able to find a couple partners to collaborate with. One was Smith Optics, and the other was, if I remember correctly, is with Black Diamond. Similarly to the way we are with Petzl. So I just thought that was pretty cool. It was inspired by a conversation that we had with them. And it was catalyzed, but the impetus was on them to get out there and do it just for the sake of trying to help the local community in Colorado. And it came back around for us to have Black Diamond involved. So there's a lot of stories like that for sure, but that's one that we were personally connected to. So that's where my mind went to initially. But I certainly talked to a couple other brands that are looking to do the same type of thing. We had outreaches from places like Lizard Skins down in the Provo area, who he had machines idle also, and people that he was trying to avoid layoffs with, and has offered to help cut material for us. And unfortunately, we haven't, for their sake, we haven't had that need crop up the way we thought we would. But just to have those types of outreaches, and I don't know if they've connected anywhere else, but certainly there were outdoor brands trying to figure out how to pivot and support each other and find ways to retain their employees and whatnot through the process. And there's lots of those stories.
That's great. Well, I think we'll end it there, but if people want to keep up with, DPS and the response, what's the best way to stay in touch with you all and continue to hear what you all are working on?
Yeah. So we're, as a part of this, we're getting a little bit more active with our LinkedIn profile, just to kind of share these stories a little more. We kind of talk about like Instagram and Facebook are a fun avenue to kind of tell our ongoing story and share, selfies and amazing turns on big mountains and things like that. But there's also some other really important stuff to us as far as being a leader in ski design and innovation and things like that. And so we're going to start using LinkedIn a little more to tell this story in particular about the PPE and then ongoing design. So those are a couple of places, as well as, just through our website, which is dpsskis.com. And, for now, those are the key outlets as everybody, I guess.
Okay. No, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Again, thanks for taking some time. I know you've got a lot you're thinking about and working on, and appreciate all you're doing. Glad to hear you're doing well and that you guys are continuing to work and lead.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and appreciate you including us just to share our story a little bit. Again, this is something I'm excited to do, not necessarily for my own benefit. I've got a job that I'm pretty happy with and not going anywhere or looking, but it's great from my perspective to be able to just share the story so our team can just really enjoy the validation and the kind of community recognition of what they've done and what we've done in general, as well as our partners in particular, like we've talked about, Goal Zero, Petzel, Eastman. I really value the opportunity to share their story and have that out there in the public and sort of give credit where it's due, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this, at least this pivot for us, without all that from our team internally and the partners. So thank you for sharing our story.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.